Hi everyone, this is Katie Weber, one of your English 203 TAs. In this lecture, I'll be discussing the tale of the Hunchback from Tales from the Thousand and One Nights. As Dr. Standback mentioned in a previous lecture, we learn in the story's prologue that this tale is told by Scheherazade, the daughter of the king's vizier. Scheherazade is set to be killed by the king the next morning, so she tells this tale in hopes that it will convince the king to spare her life. This is a theme that we see repeated several times throughout the tale of the Hunchback as well. While it appears to the king that Scheherazade is merely responding to her sister's request to tell a tale of marvel so that the night may pass pleasantly, it is clear to us as readers that this is intended to save Scheherazade's life. As you read the assigned tales, I would encourage you to think about the ways in which these stories are told under duress and how these circumstances might affect the telling of the tales themselves. Do you think that these tales all hold absolute truth, or might they be exaggerated, and why? The Tale of the Hunchback in our edition is the very first tale told after the prologue, right before the donkey. While we learned in previous lectures that these tales were told orally for hundreds of years before being transcribed into a written collection, I would also encourage you to think about why, if we are taking the arrangement of stories in our edition into account, that Scheherazade might have told the tale of the Hunchback first, or why the editor might have chosen to put this story as the very first one in our edition. While I know we looked at the layout of this tale in our lecture for last week, I wanted to put it back up before we dive into the nitty-gritty of the Hunchback's tale. As I'm sure you noticed while reading, this tale is made up of several tales. It's almost like a Russian nesting doll of stories as you read. In case you got lost at any point, here's the breakdown of how these stories are laid out. We start with the tale of the Hunchback, then the Tailor's Tale, the tale of the lame young man and the barber of Baghdad. Then we have the barber's tale, and within it we have the tales of all his brothers. We then circle back to the barber's tale before finally wrapping up the tailor's tale and the tale of the hunchback at the end. There's a specific term for this kind of layout of stories within stories, though this is an example of a fairly complicated one. This is called a frame narrative. So that begs the question, what is a frame narrative? If you've never heard of this term, Oxford Reference defines a frame narrative, which can also be called a framed story, as a story in which another story is enclosed or embedded as a tale within the tale, or which contains several such tales. Another example of a frame narrative would be Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, which many of you might have read excerpts from in high school or in prior English classes. The frame narrative in the Canterbury Tales involves a group of people going on a pilgrimage who decide to tell each other stories to pass the time on their journey, and the rest of the Canterbury Tales is made up of those tales, like the Knight's Tale or the Wife of Bath's Tale, for example. Knowing this context about frame narratives, it's clear to see that the tale of the Hunchback consists of multiple frame narratives stacked inside one another. Taking it a step further, all of the tales in Tales from the Thousand and One Nights are contained within the frame narrative of the prologue, the story of Scheherazade and Shahryar. The tales from the barber about his brothers are therefore stories inside a story, inside a story, inside a story, inside a story, inside a story. Lots of layers there. This is really a masterful example of how frame narratives operate. To keep these layers a little less confusing, our edition of the text uses section headers to indicate each new tale, as you can see on the screen here. As the story goes on, the narrator finds ways to show us that we are leaving one layer of the story and going back to the other, like parenthetical asides such as continued the barber to the group and continued the tailor, as you can see on the screen here. In this edition of Tales from the Thousand and One Nights, larger breaks between paragraphs also help indicate that we are entering or re-entering a different part of the story. While this is certainly helpful to modern readers, think about the ways this might have looked back in the time that these stories were being told orally, and of course, within the framework of Scheherazade's story as well. Storytellers like Scheherazade would have to be masterful in their craft in order to make it clear who was speaking and in what layer of the story. Otherwise, their audiences could get very confused very quickly. Next, we'll discuss some key themes that we see throughout the tale of the Hunchback. On the table for today are storytelling and disability and disfigurement. We see these themes repeated several times throughout this tale, and we even see storytelling in particular within the prologue as well. First and foremost, I wanted to revisit a key theme that Dr. Standback discussed in last week's lectures about the prologue: stories as salvation, as life saving. Not only do we see the life saving power of stories in the overall frame narrative of Scheherazade and Shahryar, but this theme is repeated several times within the tale of the Hunchback itself as well. The tailor is telling his story to the king to escape the punishment of death for killing the hunchback, and the barber tells his brother's stories to the caliph to convince him to spare his life after he is mistaken for a criminal. By the time you're watching this lecture, you will have read the epilogue to Tales from the Thousand and One Nights as well, so you know that Scheherazade's life is ultimately spared due to her masterful storytelling. The tailor's story is so successful that not only is his life spared, but he is given a position on the royal court, given an annuity, and awarded a robe of honor. The last few paragraphs of the text, pasted here, read, "The king and all the company marveled greatly. By Allah, exclaimed the king, I have never in my life heard of an incident more strange than this." Then, turning to the captains of his army, he added, "Have any of you, good Moslems, ever seen a dead man come to life in this fashion? Had not Allah sent him this barber, our hunchback would have now been counted among the dead." And all those present said, "By Allah, it is a rare marvel." The king ordered that the incident be recorded on parchment and that the scroll be kept in the royal library. He bestowed robes of honor upon the Jew, the Christian, the steward, the tailor, the hunchback, and the barber. He appointed the tailor to his court and endowed him with a large annuity, and reconciled him with the hunchback, who again became the king's drinking companion. The barber also he appointed to his court, and conferred upon him many honors, and made him a favorable companion. And they lived happily until they were visited by the destroyer of all earthly pleasures, the annihilator of man. Ultimately, as we read here, the tailor's story not only spares his life, but greatly improves it, as well as the lives of several others. While storytelling is ultimately the means of salvation for multiple characters in both Tales from the Thousand and One Nights as a whole and the tale of the Hunchback, it becomes clear that this storytelling comes with a risk as well. Those who are less adept at storytelling might find themselves punished, as we see with the barber. Throughout the tale of the lame young man and the barber of Baghdad, the young man characterizes the barber as a foolish blabbermouth. When it comes time for the barber to tell his side of the story to the rest of the breakfast party, he tells them, "This young man has accused me of being talkative and meddlesome, two vices from which, unlike my 6 brothers, I am entirely free. To prove you the falseness of this charge, however, I shall now tell you the following story, and you shall judge for yourselves that I am a man not only of few words, but also of great generosity and chivalry." The irony in the barber's statement lies in the fact that his story contains 6 other stories and is by far the most lengthy tale within the tale of the Hunchback, aside from the tailor's tale in which it's contained, if we count that. He also insists on telling the caliph the story of each and every one of his brothers long after the caliph has already decided to free him and tries to let the barber go. By the time the barber makes it to the end of his last brother's tale on page 73, the caliph marks him sarcastically. "I can see, my friend, that you are a man of few words, who knows neither curiosity nor indiscretion. Yet I must ask that you leave this city at once and go to live elsewhere." The barber remains entirely unaware of how foolish he looks, noting that he was banned from Baghdad for no conceivable reason. The company at the breakfast party are so thoroughly convinced of the barber's folly and the lame young man's integrity that they imprison the barber in an empty room, and he is only let out the next day when the king orders him to be set free. Looking outward to the frame narrative of Tales from the Thousand and One Nights as a whole, through the barber's character, we are shown the potential consequences if Scheherazade's storytelling plan fails. She could be subject to any number of punishments for being too talkative if her stories are not engaging enough for Shahryar. Ultimately, this characterization of the barber, in a roundabout way, underscores Scheherazade's own bravery as a storyteller in the face of death. The next theme that I'd like to discuss is disability and/or disfigurement. We see several disabled and disfigured characters throughout the text, which I've listed on this slide. Throughout the tale of the Hunchback, it is clear that many people in this society view disability or disfigurement as a punishment for wickedness, whether from Allah or from their own society. For example, the steward, after hitting the body of the hunchback over the head with a mallet and thinking that he murdered the hunchback himself, exclaims, "There is no strength or power to save in Allah. A curse upon the meat and the butter, and upon this night which has witnessed your death at my hands, you wretch." Then perceiving his deformity, he added, "Is it not enough that you are a hunchback? Must you also be a kitchen thief? O Allah, protect me in your mercy." It is clear that the steward sees the hunchback's body as an outward expression of his wickedness or a punishment for it. We see this repeated in the tale of Alcuz, the barber's fourth brother. When the governor sees the lashes upon Alcuz's back, that he got after being falsely accused of selling human flesh instead of mutton, the governor says, "Wretched criminal, one need only look upon your back to see that you have practiced every kind of crime." The barber's six brothers are made fools by their exploits of love, lust, greed, and gluttony. While all of the other five brothers are disfigured as a result of their actions, it is interesting to note that Bakbak, who seems to have always been blind, is punished for using his disability to hoard wealth. Each of the brothers are seemingly disfigured as an outward sign of their inner vices. The barber himself implies the same when he tells his story in response to the lame young man's, arguing that the lame young man should, indeed, be thankful that his folly cost him merely his leg and not his life. He relates the lame young man's disability to his folly instead of the actions that caused it. Throughout history, many have viewed disability as a form of divine punishment. The tale of the hunchback offers us a glimpse into a society in which this rhetoric is rampant, though this mindset is not entirely obsolete in the modern era. I just wanted to make it clear here that these are obviously not my own views. If you're interested in learning more about disability studies in English, Dr. Standback is an excellent resource. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the lack of voice given to the disabled and disfigured characters in this tale. Even though the story is called The Tale of the Hunchback, we as readers don't hear directly from the hunchback at all. The only disabled character who tells their own story is the lame young man, who tells the tailor's company about his dealings with the barber of Baghdad. The way the tales themselves are named even favors the able-bodied. The stories from the tailor and the barber are called the tailor's tale and the barber's tale, while the tales of the disabled or disfigured characters are the tale of the hunchback, the tale of the lame young man and the barber of Baghdad, and the tales of the barber's six brothers. This initially may seem like a way of showing who exactly is telling these stories, or who these stories are about. For example, though the tale of the lame young man and the barber of Baghdad is the story told by the lame young man, the tailor is the one actually recounting this tale to the king after hearing it at a breakfast party. The barber tells tales about his six brothers to the caliph, so they're the tales of Bakbuk, al-Hadar, Bakbak, al-Kuz, al-Ashar, and Shakashik. However, this rule falls apart when looking at the barber's tale, because the tailor is the one recounting this tale as well. At no point do we leave the tailor's narrative to let the barber tell this story himself. Yet, this story is still titled The Barber's Tale and not The Tale of the Barber. Therefore, the stories of the disabled and disfigured characters in particular are appropriated by those who are able-bodied throughout the tale of the hunchback. Throughout this lecture, we've taken a look at the ways in which storytelling can be both life-saving and risky for several characters, as well as the ways in which the disabled characters in this tale are both seen as deserving of their disability or disfigurement and are afforded far less agency than their able-bodied counterparts in the storytelling process itself. I want you to think on these themes as you read the rest of the tales for this week. Can you apply these themes anywhere else? I'll leave you with one final question to consider. Is storytelling a privilege in the Tales from the Thousand and One Nights? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're having a great day whenever you're tuning in.